So it was a school day, and in a rare move, buses lined the long drive leading into Suva Grammar School in Veuto in Suva. As kids clamored to get on board, teachers stood at the door to each bus, and they were telling certain kids that they couldn't get on that bus or any vehicle that was heading into Suva City. So I was one of those kids. My sister, who looked like our Samoan European father, John Foster, would be allowed to get on board, but not me, because I look like our mother, Jean, who's of Indian ancestry. It was 1987, and Fiji had just lost its innocence in its first coup. Terrified teachers were trying to get hundreds of students home safely, and our school was about 300 meters down the road from the home of the Prime Minister, Dr. Timothy Bavandra, who had been taken hostage along with his cabinet. Special care had to be taken to ensure that kids of Indian ancestry got home safely and by different paths. In fact, I have no idea how I got home that day. If ever there was a time that I felt like a non-person, I think it was that day. My mother, meanwhile, was in the heart of the city. She was holed up with all her workmates while there was absolute chaos going on downstairs. She told us later that the screams were haunting as people of Indian descent struggled, ran through Sukuna Park trying to get away from the mob. I think it was the worst day in Fiji's history. In the years that followed, our teenage invincibility and the fact that we were in a progressive multiracial school effectively shielded us from any horrors of racism that were raging. And there was a massive power struggle going on as well, which we were totally oblivious to. We survived a rejigged education system, dwindling resources, and the loss of so many skilled teachers. And it was purely through the help of our families, some really amazing teachers who stayed behind during those terrible days, and each other, really. Like, we just had to help each other. Then the day came when I was among several students that had been selected on merit for scholarships to study abroad. So we all rocked up, and I was asked why I wanted to be a journalist. My answer was that I wanted to make a difference, that I wanted to speak for people who might be voiceless. I wanted to shine a light on injustice. And I really wanted to hold people who were in power accountable. Surprisingly, I still got the scholarship. I don't know how that happened. So I was headed to Australia. Let me tell you, Canberra in the 90s, oh my God. So they had legalized prostitution, they legalized marijuana, and the city was just full of students. You know what students like, I'm not going to tell you. Civil servants, media, politicians, you know, it was just crazy. I don't think it's changed much, actually, since those days. And I'm forever grateful to my mother's side of the family that helped me through those years, which were, you know, mind-blowing for me, including my Aunt Josephine, who's here today with my cousin Camelia. The picture was totally different when I returned to Fiji, though. I joined the Fiji Times. The coup leader in '87, Sitiveni Rabuka, was the prime minister, and Fiji was on track for its third constitution. Under that constitution, the Fiji Labour Party, led by Mahendra Chaudhry, was elected to power with the Fijian Association Party. And unfortunately, the agitation began again. So journalism, I think, has never been for the faint-hearted. And Fiji was going to test the boundaries of what people will tolerate for quite a long time yet. Just months after the birth of my second son, Dylan, I found myself back in Veuto, up the road from my old school, where Parliament was now situated. They had taken the Prime Minister, Mahendra Chaudhry, hostage, all his cabinet, whatever government members, and it was the 2000 coup. We were trying to ascertain where they were, how safe they were, and what the intentions were of the people who were holding them hostage. I sat beside parliamentary staff who were in just total shock, just sitting there speechless. And behind us, there was a mob of people that were literally cheering on the death of democracy. Their figurehead, George Speight, and I know, his niece and everyone really well, was going to hold a press conference. So all the journos were sort of corralled into this room on the government side of the complex to find out, what the situation was. I remember my husband called me at around that time, and he was asking me, where are you? Where are you? Like he was wanting to come pick me up. And I said, no, it's okay. I'm back inside Parliament. I don't think he was very impressed at all, but what I really meant was that I was not on the streets, where all the rioting was going on. As we stood waiting for George Speight to tell us what was going to happen, I remember thinking, not again, It was like 13 years since 1987, and Fiji was going to be thrust into the abyss yet again, like hadn't we just done that journey? It was the then deputy editor, Netani Rika, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's an amazing man. He drove me home that night. So what happened was, the police disappeared, and the army disappeared. This was the 2000 coup. And so the streets were basically left to whoever wanted to take control, really. So landowners and different people had put up roadblocks everywhere in different parts of the city. And I lived about 20 minutes outside Suva on the outskirts of Lami town. So we were really flying, by the seat of our pants to see if I was going to make it home that night. So Netani was driving, and we're going, and we're like, okay, there's a roadblock. Coming up to the roadblock, and as we come, this guy beams at him and goes, close up, close up. So that was a TV show that Netani was hosting on Fiji TV. Anyway, so I think we got through 3 roadblocks that way until we came to the most crucial one in my case, which was the one leading to my house. And there was absolutely no way that we were going to be let through. So Netani spoke to the guy who looked like the ringleader at the roadblock, and asked him, what's the best way for me to get from there to there? And he pointed. And he said, well, she's going to have to walk. Basically, I had to walk along a shortcut that had been cut by the seafront to get to where my in-laws lived. We were living with them at the time. So I said, okay, I'll do that. He's like, right, you get to the other side, you call me straight away, all the usual safety things. So I go down into this shortcut. It had been cut into the mangroves. It was sand and gravel, I looked around, I tried smiling at people, didn't get much of a response. I didn't recognize anybody. So it was evening, I was walking really fast. Then all of a sudden I decided to look back. You should never look back. And there was the guy following me, oh my God. I looked back, he was following. I'm like, no, he's just going the same direction I'm going in, right? So I slowed down, he slowed down. I went faster, he went faster. I was like, what the hell? Anyway, so then I just picked up the pace. When I finally got to the bottom of our driveway, going up the hill, I was so relieved. I almost ran up that driveway. And I got to the top, and I looked back, and the guy was standing there. I didn't recognize him. He was like in the distance. He'd stopped, watched me go up, turned around, went back. So it wasn't until later, when one of the women who worked for my mother-in-law came to work, that she told my mother-in-law what had happened. So her son had come home, and he said he saw me get off the van. And he saw me go into that shortcut in the mangroves. And he said, I'm just going to follow her and make sure she gets home safe. I mean, Fiji does that kind of stuff to you, It renews your faith in the goodness of people, despite what the mob might do. And these are the same people, like you might walk past their house, and they're having lunch, and they might ask you in to come to lunch. Your house might be damaged by floodwaters or a cyclone, and unhesitatingly, they will give you their bed to sleep in. And these are the same people, just happened to us this past Christmas, where they will put a lovo in the ground at Christmas time and send the kids over with chicken, dalo, and palusami. Regardless of whether they have enough or not, they will split it and give you some. Amazing, amazing people. That's why it was so sad that this country, which has so much potential, was thrust again into the abyss in 2006 when the military took over again. And yet again in 2009, when the constitution was abrogated, because the court had ruled that the Bainimarama regime was illegal. So the very next day, the constitution was abrogated and he was back in power. The military that day, they moved swiftly to contain the sort of information that the people of Fiji were getting. We were not allowed to tell our readers exactly how we would write a news story, straight up, this, that, these are the facts. We were only allowed to give the military side of the story. We weren't even allowed to tell people that we were being censored, so that we couldn't even say that. And the news was purely sort of like a PR exercise for the military to sort of win people over to their side of why things were happening. So the Fiji Times took the extraordinary step, and my former colleague Nolene is here, where we published blank spaces, every spot, because we printed the pages out, those big pages, and every space where they had censored a story, they crossed it out with a pen. We said, all right, we just dropped that, and we left it blank. And so when I remember the guy saying to me, Sophie, the page, I'm like, here, the stories you said aren't running, are not running. You can ask Rika if you want. So anyway, we sent it straight to the press, it printed, it was gone. The next day, the soldiers arrived. They were not very happy, let me tell you, and they just basically came with their own army of government censors. I mean, the censors themselves, these were people that we knew. And all of a sudden, for the first time, they were on the wrong side of freedom of speech. It's an amazing thing when someone takes away your right to speak freely. Some people immediately embrace their new master. Some people just go into self-protection mode, and other people just scream into the wind. So in our case, our job as journalists, I would have thought, every journalist that was there, it would be to continuously chip away at that wall of censorship and try and get as much news through, flowing as smoothly as possible in an environment that was, quite frankly, very hostile. I was deputy editor by then to Netani Rika, who was the editor-in-chief. And, he's an amazing man. He pushed the boundaries of freedom of speech in this climate, despite his home being firebombed. He was hauled into camp several times for questioning. I remember one time they were questioning him, and he had called me, and so I listened to the whole interrogation while his phone was on inside his pocket. I don't really want to do that ever again, really. Like, these are people that you care about. So, it seems really ridiculous that when they know that they're censoring every story anyway, why would you even bother with all that other harassment? That was still not good enough for them. They wanted our hearts and minds as well, or at the very least, the hearts and minds of the journalists who they saw as being a real threat to them. One journo was told that they knew which way her daughter walked home after school. Her daughter was in primary school. I saw for myself the extent of the surveillance when one afternoon I had dropped my son off at home, and he was walking up the hill, and my older sister Shannon happened to be coming by. So she's got this massive four-wheel drive, so she parked behind me, and we're standing in between chatting. And I looked and I saw this vehicle coming. And I know this maroon vehicle because we were on the lookout for this maroon vehicle. It was at Tani's house the night his house was firebombed. This vehicle starts coming very slowly, and then these men in fatigues are looking up the driveway, watching my son walk up into the house. If the men in the car were shocked because I stepped out onto the road, and if the men in the back were shocked to see me, the driver, he didn't care. He just kept driving slow and steady. It's obviously what they're trained to do. And then he disappeared around the corner. I mean, the mind boggles at the sort of thought processes that must have been going through their minds. I really don't know what they thought they were going to achieve. If anything, it was more antagonistic. If you're a firm believer in freedom of speech, that sort of thing's going to make you very angry, isn't it? I fielded a phone call once from an army colonel, and incidentally, this guy is actually in jail now. And he called me, and he's like, ranting and raving. He was at a grog party and decided he wanted to impress the people that he was with. And he starts harassing me on the phone, and he said, do you know your writing is rubbish? We use it in the officers' school to teach the officers how not to write. And I said, oh, so you do read my stories. And he was really taken aback, I think. And he kept ranting and raving and ranting. And in the end, I just gave him the email address of the Media Council, and I told him that he was well within his rights to file a complaint if he wanted. I mean, that was 9 years after the 2000 coup. We'd done all of that before. None of that even worked. So when the curtain finally fell on Fiji for me was when the military passed the decree outlawing foreign media ownership. So basically, they wanted to kick News Limited out of Fiji. When the new owners of Fiji Times moved in, and they had to be local, and they had to live in the country so that they could come and pick them up anytime they wanted, is what I would have thought. So they were not going to do anything that was going to antagonize the regime. So in the face of all that mounting pressure, the axing of the editor-in-chief and his deputy was a small price to pay. And I was promised by their new publisher that if Netani and I left quietly, nobody else would lose their job. Anyway, my path was already clear. My son's father my older boy, Ethan, had taken him and put him in boarding school in Brisbane. So, there's no way I was not going to head there. My cousin, Barney, John, he put us up at his house in Brisbane while we decided what we wanted to do. And then it just so happened that my son's school, he was at St. Joseph's Naji College, a Catholic school, they were putting on a bus to a suburb which was near the office, near the newsroom, for the first time ever. And so I saw that and I thought, that's fate telling me that's where I'm going to set down roots. So that's what we did. I enrolled my youngest son in an amazing local primary school. And he did so well there that he went on to be house captain even. And then he went on to join his older brother at Naji. And as a mum of boys, and knowing how important it is for when you do come over to make connections, I found Naji's principles of 10,000 brothers. Basically they're building a network. I found that very heartwarming. And basically that's what they did. In my mind, I see those as the golden years, seeing my sons through those periods of high school. It was amazing. And you know what? It was the first time in years that I have felt safe. And it was a fantastic period. So the question arises as to how you rebuild a life in effectively what's a foreign land for me. Being a minority person of color in Australia is not like the easiest card to be dealt. I think, though, that I've escaped relatively unscathed. I started work 2 days after arriving in Australia, and my first news story was a story about businesses in Rockhampton being underwater. They called it the Rocky Horror Show, but it wasn't a joke because within days, really, the Brisbane River was at record levels. It was the 2011 floods, and hundreds of homes went underwater. And the army mobilized again, but it wasn't like the army in Fiji. It was the mud army. I don't know if you remember that. But hundreds of people, some people came up from New South Wales to Brisbane. They mobilized and they came in and they helped people clean up after the devastation. Strangers, friends, people they didn't even know. Some people were making tea. For me, I found that incredibly touching in a society that's very individualistic. And that, that really spoke to me. And I found that one of the most satisfying things that you can do is put your hand up to help. Join community initiatives. One initiative that I've joined is called SP Win, which is in Brisbane, South Pacific Women in Network. And basically it helps people make that transition. We do stories about people, who have successfully made the transition. And then our ultimate goal is to be able to have a whole array of people who can be mentors to people who are making the transition. And sometimes It's not even people who've come from overseas, but Pacific Islanders who are living in Brisbane, but they don't have those connections that they need to get into the corporate world or to, to make the jump in whatever dream they're pursuing. I know religious and sporting groups also play a big role. In Brisbane, there's a group called Fitness 620. Let me tell you, these guys are amazing. They give free boot camp sessions. They put it on, rain, whatever. We don't have snow, so it won't be snow. Sometimes hail. But they put on these free boot camp sessions, and whoever wants to come can come. And you don't need to be a Pacific Islander. You can be anybody. And they rope people in, jogging by. Come on, come join us. And they do it because they're part of the Breakthrough Church, and they see it as their mission to help people build their well-being, their self-confidence, and that sort of stuff. Despite, the individualism that we live in, people still, I think, yearn for that connection, that camaraderie, communal camaraderie that we grew up with. I found my extended foster family, the Fosters, in Brisbane and elsewhere, to be extremely supportive. Social media helps. Oh my goodness, it's so easy to make connections now. My in-laws who live on the Sunshine Coast have been amazing. And so too friends from Fiji that have also made the jump, some of whom were with me on that day at Suva Grammar School in 1987. So is that not what home is then? That feeling of making that connection, of being heard, of being able to speak, of being understood. With that sort of support network that we had in Brisbane, I mean, how could my boys not succeed? I remember my oldest son was 14 when he told me that what he really, really, really wants to do with his life is be a clearance diver. My heart almost stopped. These are the guys that they send in first to go and disarm the bombs underwater, and then they let the ships go into the harbor. So, he's gone on to, he's with the Australian Navy Submarine Corps now, and he's doing his dream job. Thank goodness it's not clearance diving, but he's aiming for that still. And my younger boy has finished high school, and he's a first-year university student studying engineering. I tell them not every day, but they might say it's every day, to make the most of the opportunities they're given. Don't throw it all away, and always think that there are many, many other people behind you that would gladly take those opportunities if it was given to them. So I think that my boys especially have embraced Australia with open arms. I mean, they still call Fiji home, even today. But they call Australia home too. It's a peculiarity known to people who've made that jump, and people who still have those kind of connections. For us, home is wherever there's family, friends, laughter, and sharing without any thought of getting anything in return. A bit like this, I think I will always count us among the lucky ones. Thank you for listening.